In April of last season, Mikel Arteta was asked whether Arsenal had reached phase 4 yet in his 5-phase plan for Arsenal. His response? Almost.
I mean, are you in phase 4 now?
Let me go back to the computer. We're not far.
I think it's fair to say that phase 4 has a lot to do with Arsenal winning the Premier League, but we know our manager, and the type of Arsenal team that we see on the pitch is equally as important in our progression from phase to phase. To be honest, the idea of pinpointing our progress between phases is not important to this video. So, why did I start with this anecdote? Well, it's because many of us expect there to be a kind of visual, on-pitch, golden standard that we will reach when we hit phase 5. But what if I told you this isn't the case? Not even for an Arsenal side that, across the last month, have, in my opinion, reached phase 4. Today's video is going to take this version of Arsenal, one of fluid rotations and also fluidity between shapes at times, and tell you why this is symbiotic of something more important and why Arteta's vision for this Arsenal team and our eventual final form has more to do with things like this. With Jorginho orchestrating and bellowing from the sidelines, the deliberate acquisition of positionless players and constructing a team who think for themselves. Welcome back to the Harvey Gratian YouTube channel. I'm so glad you found us or are joining us once again. And I'm here to tell you essentially that the levels of fluidity we've seen over the past month on the pitch are definitely something we will continue to see going forward, but we shouldn't see them suddenly as the set and forget option for us, especially not in terms of the extreme levels of flexibility of late. Rather, this fully rotational, almost revolving Arsenal should be seen as another tactical variant, a brilliant one to add to our repertoire. However, this newest iteration of Arsenal is here to stay permanently in one respect. But that is the whole point of the video, because what this Arsenal side that we've seen from the Spurs away game to the PSG at home match tell us is staying is a new frame of mind for the players. In other words, the fluidity we're seeing on the pitch at the moment tells us more about the development of the squad up here. Now, this is all rather conceptual, so let me ground you a little bit more. If my analyses post PSG and post Leicester focused on that synchronicity the team has and emphasising how even though it seems chaotic at times with bodies moving everywhere, with Saliba for example frolicking into midfield, these movements are always balanced out by a team on the same wavelength with each other. When Saliba wanders forward, we create that back three with Timber, Raya and Gabriel. Or when Calafiori pops up in awkward to mark positions here at the top right of our midfield box, look how a team modulates. It modulates to harmonise his gallivanting around the pitch. In other words, there is intention. There are patterns to our improvisations that reveal how clever this team is, because you can't just give freedom on a football pitch if you do not have the individuals who understand timing to maintain the balance across the pitch and not leave you understaffed or vulnerable in other areas. Arsenal can do this because they are a team full of unique movers, natural associators, players who love to work off and to work with each other. As Arteta said about Jurrien Timber and Ricardo Calafiori, and this is reflected in the rest of the team too, they have the brain and adaptability to occupy different zones, and this is in relation to both initiating movement, like Timber does here, or remeasuring yourself to counteract someone else's, like Calafiori here. So, how does this relate to Arteta's vision for Arsenal? Well, I'm starting to show you how the focus in recent times, the focus has become much more player-based. And this is not to say that it wasn't before, but relatively, Arteta and this group have a real collective trust now and a unified wavelength that means they can be set free in the loosest terms more often. The next part of this video is going to focus on a particular passage of play from our most recent game against Southampton. It's when Mikel Merino, Gabriel Martinelli and Leandro Trossard were subbed on. And like I said, I want this to be much more specific than saying, oh, Arsenal are just a more adaptable team now. Let me show you how and why they are, and what this means. This is much later in the game against Southampton, but here we start with Kiwior and Declan Rice in the pivot duties, and then Merino comes to drop in, pushing Kiwior back out wide and creating that base that we've come accustomed to, with Havertz and Trossard floating on top of our pivot platform, moving off each other like a pendulum. And here, Leandro Trossard is doing that between the lines connecting job, and Kai Havertz is pinning high. As play continues, Declan Rice shuttles out to the right back zone, sucking Southampton players in with him and allowing Tomiyasu to carry into midfield and now find the unmarked Merino. Subtle improvisations to create new ways to break presses. It's become something we're familiar with now. We've also seen Havertz and Trossard moving high and low and sometimes from side to side, but we've rarely seen them both dropping like this, which creates that 1v1 in the back line for Martinelli, who uses Trossard and Havertz movements as almost a kind of trigger to spring in behind, and Merino duly accepts this invitation. It's not about a team who have to be this adaptable with our movements every second of every game. It's a team that may move from tactical variation to tactical variation, but one that will remain ready to improvise at each and every point. And this is the key, and it relates to Ødegaard's return actually down the line. Closer to his reintegration, I'll most likely dedicate a proper video to it. But for now, what I want to emphasise that, for Mikel Arteta at least, it's not about an Arsenal with or without Martin Odegaard. It's been about using his absence to adapt ourselves, creating this current iteration of Arsenal that, even if it's not to the same extent, has a freedom of mind that aids Ødegaard's own transition on his return back into the team. Because this was my favourite passage of play from the Southampton game that not only helps illuminate a bit what I was speaking about then, but also what Arteta's vision for Arsenal is a bit better. We start with that familiar base once again, and with Raya stepping into the back line, and you can see how Trossard and Havertz are interchanging high and low. Now, Declan Rice's drop in between the centre-backs pulls Kai Havertz even lower, and when we are talking about how Ødegaard can come back into the picture, you would hope that he would nestle himself firmly into the build-up picture here to overload and give us that calming, rhythmic passing presence on the ball that I think, if we were being hypercritical of our performances in recent times, we've probably lacked that on the ball, at least in my opinion, because by no means do I want Ødegaard playing as a shadow striker again. I want him able to dominate our build-up. And although I'll admit I don't necessarily have the answer to how exactly our dynamics will look when Ødegaard returns, what I do know is that there isn't going to be the same pivoting high and low like there is between Havertz and Trossard. But if we roll this passage on, you can see the template and the blueprint for how Havertz and Ødegaard can still move freely off each other and take advantage of how they see space on the pitch, which is so intelligently. It's about embracing those rotations on a horizontal axis that Trossard and Havertz do on occasion. Here, we work the ball back round to our left-hand side to access Calafiori as our free man. In the meantime, Trossard and Havertz have switched sides, creating separation from their markers in doing so. Calafiori finds Havertz free drifting into this high left pocket, and these types of dynamics are where you feel that Martin Odegaard can be really potent in. Havertz picks it up, and his first touch is against the momentum that we've just created, but the angles that Ødegaard likes to play at, you feel we could see this entire passage of play, but with him providing his own interpretation to Kai Havertz's movements here. Because look at how, as soon as Havertz receives it, Martinelli is making that out to in dart, and Calafiori is arriving higher at speed on the outside to fill that hole. Remember, this Arsenal team is one that loves to rotate in the build-up to empty positions and create these moments of dynamism arriving onto the ball in these types of areas. Both these passing lanes here that Ødegaard loves to hit when he's coming onto the ball on the left-hand side. Havertz elects to go back to Mikel Merino, who has completed that left-hand side rotation nicely by filing in at left-back. But as the play continues, look how this freer-spirited Arsenal momentarily empty the centre of the pitch, with Rice dropping into right centre-back, and here any of Calafiori, Merino, or if we envision Martin Odegaard floating about, any of these can drop into the pivot here. Again, the ball is worked back round to Calafiori, who hits a first timer to that hard to pin down Kai Havertz, working himself into a similar position before finding Martinelli. And look at Calafiori again, darting into and creating holes. There is an off-the-cuff nature to Arsenal now that I've touched on a lot in recent videos, and here it's where we find ourselves coming back to Jorginho on the sidelines. This is what the whole video has been building to. I said in a recent podcast on the Gooniverse channel, Arteta's ideal Arsenal is building a team of player managers.
The wake of sort of the absence that is Martin Odegaard, and I think looking at what an Arteta ideal might be, I think a lot of what we've heard from the players, especially recently in their interviews, Saka's talked about this a lot, has talked about winning in different contexts. But I think there's a definite push from Arteta towards having almost a team of on-pitch managers themselves.
Creating a side who see the game through the same lens as he does, and hence are able to improvise and adapt on the fly, and actually at times remove that extra layer of mediation from manager through to player, and almost start to operate unconsciously on the pitch together. Whether it is these rotations where players naturally provide the balance, the counter movements required as our shape revolves, or whether at times they need a little more direction and guidance, like Calafiori gives Martinelli here to move inside, or like Merino does for Martinelli's goal against Southampton, just nudging him in to make that back post run. Simply put, we have very clever football players, and I want to take this time to highlight Merino in his first couple of appearances in an Arsenal shirt at the forefront of that and the intention behind our transfers in recent times. Trossard and Martinelli here in this example are interchanging, moving off each other, and remember me talking about how Merino just works so well as a foil at times to this flurry of movements. Here, he just hangs in the half space, makes one underlap and doesn't receive, continues sitting before going again and being found by Martinelli, and Martinelli's opening up of passing lanes from the touchline was actually a really encouraging point against Southampton, and how he was able to interchange and link up with Merino. And we've also seen a development in this regard over the last month or so with Martinelli. I remember how subtly he linked up with Jurrien Timber high up in often isolated pockets against Tottenham Hotspur. So I hope I've shown you it's not about always being this whirring tumble dryer like Arsenal in every game. This becomes a simply awesome tool to use when we are against high presses and we want to deviate a little bit in shape and discombobulate them like we did against PSG. Or if we want to keep a more consistent shape against a low block, we can still use those incredibly fluid rotations, but just within a more settled structure, like against Leicester. There is an option as well to be a bit more positionally rigid, a bit more calm. There is the option of recognising too when to get behind the ball a bit more. That is ultimately how Mikel Arteta sees things, approaching the game and maybe a stretch of the season with a real clear plan, but happy to adjust to the context of the game.
I think a lot of what we've heard from the players, especially recently in their interviews, Saka's talked about this a lot, has talked about winning in different contexts. And I think
we've heard that word a lot, haven't we, of late? Context, from both manager and players. And it's because it's central to this team that Arteta is trying to create, a chameleon team. What do I mean by that? Well, a team of player managers able to improvise, able to see the game through and for Mikel Arteta, removing, like I said, that extra layer of mediation from the manager at times, and creating a squad of players totally in sync mentally, creating the ultimate chameleon outfit on the pitch, able to shift colours according to the context of the game, able to deal with cogs and key cogs missing and change approach. So, if this new Arsenal of creative movements tells us anything, it's that this team trusts each other. This team believes in our tactical variety, our adept perception of the game. This is what this new Arsenal that I've covered in the last two analysis videos tells us. This is why I believe this fluidity that we're seeing is Arsenal entering phase 4. This is a team of believers, and who knows where that could take us.